how's it going to help Aboriginal people? And I'll say what I said about the voice. If you can show me a good plan, even a theoretical plan, this is how it will help Aboriginal people, I would give it some serious consideration. But for the voice, no one was able to do that. No one's been able to do it with a treaty. And again, we know what works. We know what Aboriginal people need. They have the same needs as non-Aboriginal people. We've seen successful Aboriginal people. They've gotten to where they are without a treaty. So we just need to replicate their success.
Hello and welcome to this special episode of Free Voices with Dr. Anthony Dillon, who is a friend of the show's and of the Institute of Public Affairs. Dr. Dillon is an Honorary Fellow at the Australian Catholic University in Sydney. He is one of Australia's leading public intellectuals, having published dozens of articles both for a popular audience and also for academic journals. Anthony has served in a number of important roles in public policy, including in relation to the Indigenous Evaluation Committee in the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet from 2018 to 2020. It is great to have Anthony back with us today to discuss the Yoorrook Commission report and many other matters relating to Indigenous affairs and the current state of politics in Australia. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Well, great. So let's start with a couple of things. So I wanted to talk about the Yoorrook Commission, which was released in Victoria a couple of weeks ago, which has many far-reaching components to it. But one thing I noticed from your website that I was reading earlier on is you made this very interesting comment about yourself, and you said that you believe that the current popular ideologies which portray Indigenous people merely as victims of history and white Australia should be challenged. Do you mind explaining to us what you mean by that when you say that?
Okay. Well, certainly there is a disproportionate disadvantage, and we know that far too many Indigenous people live in squalor, don't have access to the sorts of services you and I take for granted. But we also know many, many Aboriginal people are doing very, very well, particularly the ones who wrote the Yurok report. And so we need to look at why that is. Obviously, they're not victims of colonization, otherwise they would all be suffering. So there's other factors that come into play, and it's not the white man trying to hold them down.
Mm. And one of the things I find interesting about your career is you've been talking about these issues. So I've got this report that you gave back in November 2005. Mm-hmm. So this is 20 years ago that you've been discussing these issues.
I was 5 years of age at
So, well, this is quite a comprehensive report for someone of 5 years of age. Yeah. And so you've been ahead of the curve on this issue, basically, of separatism, whether it's the voice to Parliament and various other things. It's basically the ideology of separatism. Yeah. What do you mean by separatism?
That Aboriginal people have different fundamental needs to non-Aboriginal people, which is absolute nonsense. That they require, a whole new government for them, or a voice for them. Aboriginal people have the same fundamental needs as non-Aboriginal people. Most services cater to them, and like with all populations, you might have some exceptions. You might have a small sector that require special services, but by and large, the mainstream services will work for non-Aboriginal people. Now, and when I say mainstream services, I mean in terms of health services, recreation, hospitals, doctors, and all that sort of thing. Schools have the same fundamental needs, and those services can and do meet many of their needs. Now, if there's something separate or special, like any other population, sure, we will cater to that need, but let's not paint them as a distinctly different, vastly different species to mainstream Aussies.
Yeah. And in this report that you wrote, so this was for the Bennelong Society, an occasional paper published in November 2005, you say that there's a number of assumptions underlying separatism. The first one, which you basically said then, is that Indigenous people are different in nature compared with non-Indigenous people. The second is that Indigenous people are essentially a homogenous group, that they all think alike. And we saw this came up in the Voice to Parliament debate, which is there's one voice for all Indigenous people, but your point, I assume, is that there's quite a lot of differences within the Indigenous grouping.
Just like there is for non-Indigenous people. It'd be silly to say, well, to have some non-Indigenous person say, well, us non-Indigenous people, we all think X, Y, Z. That's nonsense. Even within your family, to say that all the wilds all think the same is nonsense. You have the same needs, but you have different opinions and different ways of doing things. And so, we shouldn't assume that all Indigenous Australians think alike, act alike, have the same preferences, all that sort of thing. There's a lot of diversity amongst them, just like any other ethnic or racial group.
Does it have the effect, do you think, of undermining the idea of individuality as well?
Oh, it certainly does. You kind of just get lumped into this group, and so then you're seen as, or you can easily then portray yourself as the victim. And, you know, I need a special service for everything and exemptions and all that sort of nonsense.
Yeah.
Again, within any group, you'll have some people with some additional special needs, and that's fine. Address those needs, but don't paint them all with the one brush.
Yeah. I just wanted to quickly ask you about the Yoorrook Commission report itself, and then we can talk about a couple of other things. So the Yoorrook Commission was first set up in 2021, notionally in relation to truth-telling, so basically a reconceptualisation of Australian history, and that's here specifically in Victoria. Now, the report was released a couple of weeks ago, and it's very voluminous. I just want to read you part of Recommendation 100, which I think gets to the crux of just how audacious this thing is. So it says here that the Victorian government should provide redress for economic loss, including past loss, lost opportunities, lost to future generations, and interest on that loss. Also redress for non-economic loss, such as cultural loss, restitution of lands, monetary compensation, tax relief. So this is basically a call for reparations payments and an even greater transfer of land to Indigenous population here in Victoria. I'm just interested in your assessment of maybe that recommendation, but the report more generally in the Commission.
Okay, well, look, first thing, I have no problem with telling what happened in the past. I would question why you'd want to keep doing it over and over again, but that's fine. People can talk about what happened, and different people will have different opinions, and we can put that into the public arena for debate. But the most pressing question should be, okay, if we want to tell what happened in the past, give our version, your version, or whatever, how is that going to help Aboriginal people today? So everything that Commission should be doing, and all these other bodies, the Voice, etc., it should be focused on, okay, how will this help Aboriginal people today? And so far, like the Voice, I haven't seen this nice line of, okay, if we do this, it'll help Aboriginal people this way. I haven't seen this nice line of, okay, if we write in skywriting that colonization existed, how is that going to help Aboriginal people today? So with regard, and these other things, benefits and that sort of thing, is, I think it's a slap in the face to those many good Aboriginal people who are doing exceedingly well today. And I trot the same argument out all the time, whether it be with the Voice or the Yurok Commission. All of those Indigenous people involved in it, obviously I disagree with them, but I do have a lot of admiration and respect for them. Regardless of their beliefs, they have achieved well by any standard. And if we're wanting to help Aboriginal people today, it should be, okay, look at the authors of this report. What have they done in order to live a good life? The proponents of the Voice, the senior leaders in the Voice, what have they done in order to live such a good life? And we already know the answer to that. So that will take care of most problems, just replicating their success amongst the masses.
Yeah, going through the report, it strikes me as very, there's a lot of hate within it, is how I feel when I read it. And I sort of say, well, if the goal is some kind of reconciliation, how can you have reconciliation when you're starting from a point of basically Australia is a bad country?
Yep.
There's nothing good about it at all. It sort of seems that this reconciliation project has gone badly off the rails to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Add to the mix that, we're so vastly different, it's going to be hard to reconcile. And, that's ridiculous, because look at the degree of intermingling and marriage and all that sort of thing. There's, no problem there. So, yeah, for reconciliation, again, if you want to acknowledge the past, that's fine, but how many times do you need to do it? And what can we do today to help those Aboriginal people who are suffering now? So for me, if reconciliation is achieved, there's many definitions for that, but it would certainly include most Aboriginal people leading a good life. They have access to the sorts of services that many of the Aboriginal leaders have, you and I have, that sort of thing.
But your point would be you don't necessarily need a separate set of governing institutions to do that.
Definitely not. I mean, even when you look within, say, the non-Indigenous sector, for want of a better expression, whoever the PM is or whoever the Premier is, yeah, certainly there's going to be people under that umbrella and say, look, I don't quite agree with him, I prefer this party or whatever. So you have those sorts of preferences, but in terms of fundamental needs, we all have the same fundamental needs.
I want to just turn, so you wrote an article about this for the Quadrant, specifically in relation to the Yurok Commission. And there was a couple of important points you made. The first was regarding colonisation. So there's a big focus in the report on colonisation, and there's a quote here from the report, which is, "First Peoples' lives are profoundly shaped by the enduring impact of cultural invasion," end quote. You question that by saying, really? Could reminiscing about the past be more about excuse-making in the present? What do you mean by that?
Okay, because it's very convenient to find something outside of myself to blame for problems I'm experiencing or other people that I'm speaking on behalf of. And yeah, certainly colonisation is a very convenient hook to hang excuses on, but it's not the problem. It's not the cause of the problems. And I think elsewhere in that paper I've said people are not victims of the past. They're victims of their view of the past, or they're victims of the lies that have been told to them about the past. Oh, you know, you're a descendant of these people, therefore you cannot move forward. Absolute nonsense. And there's so much counter evidence to that. You know, it's a bit like if an astrologer tried to tell us that Leos are ambitious, creative people. Well, there's so many counter examples that would refute that.
Yeah.
And there's so many counter examples that would refute that Aboriginal people are victims of colonisation. Again, to repeat myself in this interview, the leaders of that report and The Voice, etc., are doing very, very well for themselves, and I'm glad that they are.
Yeah.
And they've proven that you can do well by following the normal formula for success in Australia. Go to where the opportunities are, get an education, work hard, apply for jobs, surround yourself with good people.
Yeah, the other concept that comes up a lot is this idea of so-called cultural safety. So in the report it says cultural safety and stability is the first thing that is needed to help young people in custody. It goes on to give another number of other examples there. What is cultural safety in the context of how it's used, either in this report or elsewhere, by sort of the activist class?
Okay, good question, and it's not answered too well. I could be mistaken. Maybe someone out there has got a definition for it, but the way I said it, it boils down to, if you're Indigenous, in whether you're having problems with the law and in education or whatever, having another Indigenous person assist you, make decisions with and for you.
Yeah.
And that comes back to this whole separatism thing. One of the main assumptions of separatism is that only other Aboriginal people can understand and help other Aboriginal people. And that's absolute nonsense. Okay, it should be competence over colour. Okay, you just need people who are good at their job. I jokingly say, if your plumbing needs fixing, you don't really care what racial group the plumber is from, so long as he or she is competent at what they do. So, yeah, in a nutshell, I think cultural safety typically means having an Indigenous person there to speak on your behalf, do things for you. And I'm not opposed to Indigenous people helping and getting involved in Indigenous affairs, but don't have this rule that only they can help or they're the best ones to help, because no one would dare say that an Indigenous person shouldn't be helping that non-Indigenous person. That's nonsense. So long as they're competent, qualified, great.
I want to ask you about this idea of separatism, because certainly when I was growing up, the idea was we should have inclusion, that I shouldn't see an Indigenous person as fundamentally different to me, that they're my fellow Australian or my neighbour and they are as I am, same as if you're a migrant or whatever else. But it seems like really to me, the last decade or so, this, if you want to call it an ideology or fixation on separatism, it has been driving a lot of considerations in Indigenous affairs, which I find to be quite poisonous in many ways, because it encourages us to see ourselves as different rather than as similar. But I'd like your sort of perspective on why is separatism so salient in the debate these days, do you think?
Why is it so
salient? Like why is it the dominant factor in Indigenous affairs?
I think because it enables some people to build some little empires for themselves. You can have certain privileges, certain status. If you can get with this identity politics and identify yourself as I'm a proud whatever man it may be, in a debate like discussion like we're having now, I'd be able to shut you down easily by saying, well, you don't speak for me because you haven't been on my journey. Absolute nonsense. We're two guys having a discussion. So playing that game enables you, it gives you a bit of power, status. And I'm not talking about financial gains. I want to make that clear too. And certainly there are some I have no problem with special programs and services to help those Indigenous people who are truly disadvantaged. You know, it could be a diabetes clinic or something in a community. I have no problem with that. But it's the status, it's the ability to be able to shut someone down in an argument. I'm offended, you can't understand. That is nonsense. I disagree with that.
So it's sort of a tool for control.
It's a tool for control and suppression, and you know, it creates division. And when you have when you're accentuating differences, it creates fear. And when you have fear, then you have people attacking each other.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that? Because I know your background is psychology, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that sounds like a psychological sort of interpretation of it, which is really interesting.
Well, people generally get along well when they see that there are some deeper, common, shared values, and that they're, you know, we're fine with people who might have different preferences in music and that sort of thing. But, you know, the basic values of what defines me, we like to recognise that whether it's with a male, female, transgender, old, young person or whatever, there's that commonality there between us. And even if we disagree with each other, we can still feel good. But as soon as someone is seen as being fundamentally different, that creates separation. It's unknown. It just creates a lot of fear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably, you've explained one of the reasons why I'm so keen on emphasising our Australian values. And you know, when you have, for example, the three flags that are always flown, the Australian plus the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags, I've got no problem with those flags. But to me, it's like there's one flag for a country that represents all of us and our shared values. And we can all be Australians. We can't all be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders. Yeah. But all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders can be Australian, and all migrants.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the things I think our shared symbols and values are so important. What, do you share that view? Or?
Yeah, look, I don't mind seeing a variety of, you know, at least two other flags there. But when it comes to talking about the nation as a whole, it's the Australian flag. And if other people want to have a presence at a meeting or a particular day, having a flag or a little logo on your shirt, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
I wanted to ask you about a couple of other things. So one of them is welcome to country, welcome to country ceremony. So this debate's been going on for a very long time. They've certainly become much more ubiquitous, whether it's welcome to country or acknowledgement to country. Every time you plane lands, you have an acknowledgement to country, various meetings in businesses before footy games and so forth. So I know in the past that you've argued that it doesn't really do anything to help Aboriginal people. What is your view on welcome to country ceremonies?
Like many other Australians have said, for special occasions, that's fine. If you've got a day of programs, something at the beginning if you want to do that, but again, not every time you have a new speaker. Get up, make it short and sweet, have, you know, a little bit of meaning, and don't hijack it with then laying the guilt trip of, you know, the oppression Aboriginal people are experiencing, presumably from the white man, etc. Make it a nice, short, sweet one that unites people and truly is welcoming.
Yeah, I don't find them very welcoming anymore. I find them quite aggressive.
Yeah. Some are. Some
you know, can be, they go on and it's like basically you've got no right to be here is the crux of what they're saying.
And that's what I mean by hijacking. You know, some are done nicely, sensitively, but some are hijacked and then used for this status game, and that's division. It's divisive. It's not good.
And I guess the other related topic is the Australia Day debate, which comes up every single year. What I've noticed in that debate is recently there's been a real surge in support behind the 26th of January. So we've been tracking polling on this for about 7 or 8 years. And our most recent polling had it at almost 70% now supported of the 26th, including young people increased a lot. So I think we've now had a situation in the community where people are like, look, this has just gone too far. And we're now seeing, I guess, a reaction to a lot of this. You know, specifically on Australia Day, what are your thoughts on the National Day?
Well, I'm going to give the same arguments that I've been giving for a long, long time. And again, I think I was the first one to talk about this, that on that day, there is nobody who is celebrating genocide. Now, if you can find such a person who is doing that, they're an idiot redneck, okay? But no one is celebrating theft and genocide. They're celebrating what a great country Australia is. And that's all it is. And many, many Aboriginal people do celebrate it as well. You go out to the remote communities, they're not concerned about protests, and they won't tell you that Australia Day is upsetting them or anything like that. They're more likely to be concerned about food and shelter and that sort of thing. So, and to say that for those activists or blacktivists, protesters, the woke, or as Bill Leak used to say, the offenderati, who are just looking for opportunities to be offended. Again, if they claim that that date upsets them, they're basically saying that day or that date has more power over them than what they have over themselves. So it's very disempowering to suggest to anyone that a particular date is a cause for upset for you.
Yeah, and one of the things that's frustrated me about the debate is there's those who say, oh, we still want to have a date, we just don't want it on the 26th. But I think quite often they're being disingenuous about that, because I don't think there's any date that many of these people would accept, as because they just don't want the date celebrated at all. So it's kind of like the welcome to country, whereas it becomes this very aggressive. There's no way of having any kind of midpoint or agreement, because it's like, well, you want to get rid of it completely. We want to have something. You just want to keep doing welcome to country. We want something different.
Look, the date might change in the future, and I won't oppose. I won't be for it, but I'm not going to stand up and protest against it. But you're quite right. I think any date you choose, and we might be celebrating it for 5-10 years. Oh, this is great, and then some historian finds out that there was something bad happened in 1792 or whatever on that date. Does that mean all of a sudden we have to be, oh, this hurts me, this offends me? No, absolute nonsense. So my advice would be stick with the date. Remember what we're celebrating, that Australia is a great country, and many non-Aboriginal and Aboriginal people do that.
Yeah. The other one is hot button one at the moment, which is a big part of the Yoorrook Commission report, is treaty, and the idea of having some kind of treaty between the government and Indigenous people. So it could be Victorian government or Australian government. Now, I don't know how a state government engages in a treaty per se. It's not clear to me. It's also not clear to me as to whether you'd have one treaty or a treaty with dozens of different Aboriginal communities. That's also not explained. But I'm just interested in your thoughts on the concept of a treaty, whether it's a good idea, bad idea. What do you think?
It's a good idea if you're a lawyer. Or you've got a job in the Indigenous industry.
Yeah.
Again, how is it going to help Aboriginal people? And I'll say what I said about the voice. If you can show me a good plan, even a theoretical plan, this is how it will help Aboriginal people, I would give it some serious consideration. But for the voice, no one was able to do that. No one's been able to do it with a treaty. And again, we know what works. We know what Aboriginal people need. They have the same needs as non-Aboriginal people. We've seen successful Aboriginal people. They've gotten to where they are without a treaty. So we just need to replicate their success.
And so what do you think the way forward is? So I think we've gone down this path, as you've outlined all the way back in 2005, of, separatism has been the governing sort of ideology, at least among the sort of activist class, maybe not shared by people on the ground.
Yeah.
What do you think should replace separatism? Is it something completely different? What are your thoughts?
Okay, well, a couple of things. It should be front and centre. We know what works for Aboriginal people. It's the same thing that works for non-Aboriginal people. And again, I keep harping on about this. Those Indigenous leaders from The Voice, from this commission, and ATSIC and all of them have done very well for themselves without a treaty, without The Voice, without all this separatism stuff. So follow their lead. We need to replicate that. There needs to be some, and it has been good to see some pushback in universities recently about, welcome to countries and assessments and that sort of thing. So we need to have a firm, sensible voice that can say from time to time, hey, that's not right, let's do it differently. Recognise, and this needs to be embedded through all the corporations and institutions, that the commonalities between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, whichever way you define Aboriginal, and that's a topic for another time, but the commonalities far outweigh the differences. So let's celebrate the commonalities. And I'm not saying, lest I be criticised, I'm not saying let's abandon Aboriginal culture altogether, whatever culture may mean. I'm not saying get rid of NAIDOC days or celebrations. Do that if you want, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But when it comes down to education, employment, safety, food and all that sort of thing, we already know the answers, and we know that many Aboriginal people are doing quite well in that area.
Yeah, and just one last question I want to ask you is sort of about, I guess, the regional and urban
that's a big one.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, and I don't have any lived experience in this area, but my perspective is a lot of these ideas around Yoorrook and Voice and so forth are driven by an urban sort of elite enclave and don't necessarily reflect conditions on the ground in remote Indigenous communities. And certainly my understanding is there's no real impetus from remote communities to be doing these things. So do you mind discussing that sort of
Yeah,
divide?
look, certainly there is a divide between the rural and the urban and the remote. And it was Nicholas Rothwell and Tony Abbott many years ago in The Australian spoke about it's about place, not race. And what they were saying was in areas, typically remote areas, and I'm not saying those areas don't have beauty, they certainly have some beauty, but we know that there are some problems. When you have a lack of employment, you introduce booze and drugs, you're going to have big problems. And I've always said, you get a remote, under-resourced town in outback Australia, you put 500 white people there, you're going to have big problems.
Yep.
So it is about the place there. And so we should be focusing on, and this is a general statement, there's a disadvantage everywhere, but we know that it's predominantly located in those remote areas where they don't have a ready access to the sorts of services you and I take for granted. So yes, dealing with remoteness is a big issue. And again, it's more about remoteness rather than Aboriginality per se.
Yeah, and do you think, maybe encouraging Indigenous people in remote parts to move to more urban centres is a good idea, or is that a potential issue in terms of it could undermine their culture and their attachment to the land that they have?
Yeah, certainly that last point you made, it could for some people. And we do need sensitive and sensible exit strategies. And again, so I'm not misquoted, I'm not saying let's rip up every Indigenous person from those remote lands. An invitation needs to be given to them. It needs to be done in a sensible way. We need to think about the next generation. And certainly for some of those older folk, removing them would be terrible for them. It's, they do have a bond, like many of us do have a bond with a certain place of origin for them. It's certainly true. So we need to, one thing, you can look at developing those areas, and certainly someone like Warren Mundine is big on developing remote areas, and in some areas it can be done. I do question in some areas, is it quite possible? And Stan Grant, who I quoted
Yes.
before, if you can find that quote about the past, it might be good to...
Yeah, I can read that out now. So you quote this in your article from a 2016 quarterly essay that Stan Grant wrote, which is, the history of dispossession and ensuing suffering can be an all too convenient explanation for what ails us, is what he says in the quote that you've provided.
And I mean, Stan's another great example. Very intelligent man, good man. He's doing very well for himself, and he's been educated and taken advantage of what's been available to him. So we need other people to do the same. But the point I want to make was Stan did say many years ago, when there was a controversy about some Western Australian communities, there was someone said they're closing them down. No, I don't think they were closing them down. Government were just saying we're not going to be handing out money all the time. Yeah. But Stan did make some very good points. He just said that there are some tough questions that need to be asked, and he just contrasted city living with remote living. That, and I don't think he was saying let's close down those communities, not at all. But he just made the point there are some tough issues that need to be addressed here. That it's really hard living in those areas. And, we're not like other parts of the world where America, for example, you go inland and you still got lots of services. Here in Australia, you go inland and you have less and less resources and luxuries that we take for granted. So agreeing with Stan, there are some tough issues, some tough questions that need to be asked. And I think ultimately for many of those communities, unless someone like Warren Mundine can come in and start up some enterprise, and I believe he can in some of these areas, and I'd be all for that. For some of these people, we need to say, hey, look, I think there's a better life if you come, we're not going to drop them in a concrete jungle, but maybe in a town that's close by, which just has a couple of doctors, a gymnasium, a picture theatre, people that can gather in safe places and all that sort of thing. And get them to think about, it's the next generation that we're really concerned about. We want your kids to, take advantage of what Australia has to offer. And if you stay there, it's unlikely that they will take advantage of what Australia has to offer.
I think the point that you've made about what Australia has to offer is a really good point, and you don't see any of that in the Yurok Commission report. There's nothing in that report about, okay, we're not comfortable with certain aspects of this country and so forth. We have a different view on our history, but we also accept that there are some pretty good things about this country, like our legal system, the rule of law, democratic rights. There's no sort of acknowledgement of anything positive, which to me is a non-starter. If you're not going to at least say, hey, there's some good things here in this country and we have lots of opportunities as Indigenous people if we want to avail ourselves of those. So that's completely missing in this debate.
Yeah, and the authors can say, look how well I've done, and this is how I've done it. Now, just finally, or maybe not finally, but something else I wish to say about that is with regard to the good things available to us. Here in Australia, I can confidently say this, and I think you'll agree, it does not matter where you are or who you are, it does not matter how bad your circumstances are, there is always someone who will be able to reach out and help you. And if you embrace that help that's given to you, you will do well. So basically, those who have done well in Australia, there's two types. There's people like myself and you, perhaps, who are born into reasonable good circumstances. I was born into good circumstances.
Yep, me too.
My parents weren't. And so they're an example of they weren't born into good circumstances. However, they went searching for the good circumstances. So the two types, you're either born into good circumstances or you move to where the good circumstances are, and someone will always be there to help you do that.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on, Anthony. So thank you so much for taking the time for chatting with us again. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for your contribution to the debate.
My pleasure. I look forward to our next discussion.